This show contains mature content and adult themes. It may not be suitable for young audiences.
True crime means good story, and then underneath it, there's something more to explore.
From Variety and iHeart Podcasts, this is a special edition of Variety Confidential, focused on true crime and entertainment. I'm Kate Aurthur, managing editor of Variety, and joining me is reporter Ethan Shanfeld.
For the next hour, we'll be investigating how the best in the business go about the craft of true crime storytelling.
It's exciting because we're in this reckoning moment where people are craving truth and authenticity and to go deeper into these stories.
Whether you're a fan of the genre or working on stories of your own, we're excited to share insights into the methods, strategies, and challenges of developing and producing content across audio and video mediums.
I don't think true crime fans are that dissimilar to any other genre. I think they come for the compelling story and they come for compelling characters. And if you have those things and you're adding like a whodunit, that's like the perfect combination of entertainment and consequences. And I just think people eat that up just kind of naturally.
First, we'll hear perspectives and insights on how true crime content is produced, the hunt for material and landing exclusives, and the serious legwork that goes into every story.
Our goal and our obligation is to get it right. So it's not to beat TMZ, it's to get it right.
Then we'll learn what it's like to work with crime victims, survivors, and their families, and the pitfalls of chasing headlines.
There's curiosity and there's conspiracy, and I think that our viewers, our audience, all of us want some authoritative entity to offer resolute answers and to separate fact from fiction, and that's one of the services that we can provide.
They address the ethical challenges of dealing with real people and law enforcement for true crime stories.
I think this is a true crime nation. Citizen detectives are obsessed with solving cases. So allowing people to really get a sense of how we do our jobs. I hear a lot that people like to, believe it or not, they like to know how the sausage gets made.
Producers get honest about how they craft narratives to keep people listening.
People are becoming more adrenaline junkies, and I think that it requires an escalation in the intensity of what you're watching to keep you engaged.
We'll talk about the impact of this genre, and they'll share inspiring stories of solving cold cases and giving families closure.
It's not just murder porn. They actually care about these people and the lives that have been affected. They're deeply invested in what happens to the people who are part of these stories.
Welcome to Variety Confidential, True Crime Edition. The people you'll be hearing from spoke with the Variety team during the inaugural True Crime Summit at the South by Southwest Festival in Austin, Texas.
Key executives who oversee the business, like Jason Sarlanis, president of linear and streaming at Warner Brothers Discovery, including TNT, TBS, truTV, ID, and HLN. Mary Robertson, founder and president of Maxine Productions, making projects like Quiet on Set and The Fall of Diddy. Christina Douglas, CEO and founder of Momentum Content with Lost Women of Alaska. Ellie Hakami, principal of Talos Films, who made House of Hammer and The Cult of the Real Housewife. Jonathan Hirsch, VP of Global Podcasts at Sony Music Entertainment. Kate Navin, head of North American Creative Development at Audible. Eric Sandler, the chief strategy officer at Pushkin Industries behind Deep Cover, Bad Women, and Fiasco. David Carabinas, co-founder and CEO at Texas Crew Productions of Sean Combs' The Reckoning. And Donald Albright, CEO of Tenderfoot TV, with shows like Truer Crime and Crook County.
Renowned and acclaimed hosts like Nancy Grace of Crime Stories with Nancy Grace, investigation discovery talent Elizabeth Chambers of Toxic, and Jody Tovey of Wisecrack. Plus, creators and multi-hyphenates like John Allen of Mr. Ballen's Strange, Dark, and Mysterious Stories, Ryder Strong of The Red Weather, Jane Lipsitz, co-founder of Alfred Street Industries and executive producer, Homicide LA and Homicide New York, and Patrick McManus, creator, showrunner, executive producer, writer, and director of Devil in Disguise, John Wayne Gacy. Featured documentary directors, including Bayan Junam of Phoenix Jones, The Rise and Fall of a Real-Life Superhero, Sydney Fussell and Jennifer Holness of #WhiteBlack, Patricia E. Gillespie of #Sky King, and journalists, correspondents, and reporters like Andrew Goldman, creator of Dead Certain, The Martha Moxley Murder, Valerie Borline, national affairs reporter for The Wall Street Journal and host of the podcast Camp Swamp Road, Eva Pilgrim, the host of Inside Edition, Beth Karras, the host and legal analyst of ID's The Curious Case Of, and Natalie Morales, correspondent for 48 Hours on CBS.
To understand who watches and listens to the true crime genre and the potential reasons for why they watch, we begin with Kevin Fitzpatrick, the executive producer of Evil Lives Here.
I think it's one of the few sort of genres where you can have different people come for different reasons. There are a lot of people who watch it for that very thing, like, at least that didn't happen to me or my family. There are people who watch it for the suspense of the storytelling, what's going to happen next. There are people who watch it for the honest humanity of it. And there are people who watch it for salacious content, hoping that it can be that. And they can still all watch the same show.
Eva Pilgrim and Beth Karras continue.
True crime is a very female audience. If you've ever been to Crime Con, you've seen them. It's all women everywhere.
I get asked a lot why that is. I'm not a psychologist, but I think that women are more likely to be victims than men. We always have to be cautious, where we are, the time of day, whatever. That's one thing. Also, we're the nurturers, raise the children, study their behavior, try to make them good little people going out in the world. There's lots of facets to it, I suppose.
Some of it was about control. I got that response a lot. This idea that the world is scary, and if I consume all of this true crime, that I will maybe have something in my head that will help me or help my family member. That sort of, we all know someone who's a victim of a crime. Some of it was just escapism, and most of them wanted a solution. They wanted to be able to listen from start to finish, to know exactly what happened and how it was going to end. And they're women my age. We grew up on like Nancy Drew. That was one of the things, is like the way we were conditioned even to read. It's like we were solving mysteries as teenagers.
As a kid, I'm dating myself, but my father would read True Detective. And then there was every Sunday in the newspaper, there'd be some true deep dive into a detective story.
Jane Lipsitz, executive producer of Homicide LA and Homicide New York.
It's more active participation because it's almost like your brain is working in a totally different way when you're watching. I think people like to deduce and imagine themselves in that position.
There's always been this interest, and with so many platforms today and so many networks today, there's just this opportunity to just tell so many stories. But I think it's always been there.
With the strong demand for content, the true crime format has seen rapid growth in style and structure. Each have their own challenge and creative opportunities.
Ellie Hakami, principal of Talos Films.
So one thing that has gotten me very excited recently is that we can tell stories over 3 hours. And I think true crime lends itself to that format because there are so many layers and there are so many perspectives. And, we tackle stories that have longevity, taken 8 years to play itself out. What I think motivates me to continue to do the true crime genre is that it lends itself to the longer format of storytelling, which I think audiences are really responding to now.
Jason Sarlanis, Warner Brothers Discovery.
When you look just visually how much this genre has evolved, the level of craftsmanship and artsmanship behind the scenes has leveled up so considerably.
Mary Robertson, founder and president of Maxine Productions.
I relish and I welcome the movement and shift in our industry towards the series, towards the 3-part, the 4-part, the 6-part series. More time means more opportunity to center the accounts of the survivors and those who may be looking to correct a power imbalance.
Jonathan Hirsch, VP of Global Podcasts at Sony Music Entertainment.
There are appetites across various different platforms and experiences for different kinds of stories, and it's harder to tell open-ended stories in maybe stories that don't have the same sort of degree of finality in limited series.
David Karabinas, co-founder and CEO of Texas Crude Productions.
Well, I think that's interesting though for podcasting because you can take that story and if it's a good story, you can just tell it. And I think for television, we're limited a little with that, right? Where we have to have something to put on the screen, right? You can substitute in voices, you can be the voice. We really need to be able to say, okay, is it a great story? Is it an interesting, and great's always a weird word to use when you're talking about true crime. But, is it this interesting story? But do we have the elements we need to tell it? Is there archival? Can we get multiple voices, so it's not just one character speaking throughout a whole documentary?
Mary Robertson.
I believe television is inherently a reductive medium. I think you have fewer words at the end of the day when you need fewer words, and you have less time than you do in a beautifully written print feature or a novel, but it is a more expressive medium. So reductive, but more expressive, and inherently, I think, more emotional than many other mediums. But we are, I think, always endeavoring to fight that reductive quality because we want the complexity, we want the detail, we want the nuance.
John Allen, host and creator of Mr. Ballen's strange, dark, and mysterious stories.
There is definitely a template to a Mr. Ballen story, and it's really by design. It's the way I constructed, the way we put together stories. And it sort of didn't matter what medium it was. Short form, long form, didn't matter what platform. It boils down to you have the intro with necessary information, you have initial intros, you have the point of transgression, you have the arc of the story that has to hit a certain point, there has to be a twist, and it fits any length of the show. You can do it over and over again, and unfortunately/fortunately, there's really no limit to how much content is out there to cover.
Donald Albright, CEO of Tenderfoot TV.
For audio, it feels like a collaboration with the audience because there is no visual element. I mean, now there's video podcasts. We do strictly audio, basically audio documentaries. But I can collaborate with the audience because I'm painting a picture in audio and you're filling in the blanks.
Valerie Borline, national affairs reporter for the Wall Street Journal.
A friend of mine who'd gone from print to podcast told me, she's like, Val, you have to flip the script in your mind. In print, the words, you telling me the story, and then the quote is the exclamation point. That's I'm telling you what to emphasize when I quote somebody, but then the words that I write is the story. And in podcasts, it's completely flipped. That the sound is what matters. And then if I'm talking as the host, it's connective tissue, maybe to put an exclamation point, but to take you from point to point. I've come to really accept that audio is the most visual medium, and people are able to paint a picture from their mind for it. So it's been a real lesson to me in storytelling. It's been expanding for me.
Andrew Goldman, journalist, writer, and creator of Dead Certain, the Martha Moxley murder.
From the perspective of medium, hearing people and the intonations of people's speech versus reading them in black and white, I find so much more kind of arresting.
Beth Karras, host and legal analyst of The Curious Case of.
You got to grab people with, we have quirky characters. And so they're just really entertaining, but they're real. And I can't get enough when I'm watching these cuts. It's like, oh my God, I'm just a kind of a character because I am allowed to do something I never could do when I was doing straight reporting. And that is use my expressions because I am very expressive and my face shows it, and I can be that way on television, and I can help guide the viewers. So many people write to me and say, oh, you asked the question I was asking. You said something that I was asking. So the balance, you got to give them the facts. I try to give a little analysis too. I give my opinion, and you've got to give some entertaining aspect, I think, to keep people drawn in, and I like the balance.
Jonathan Hirsch, Sony Music Entertainment, and Jason Sarlanis, Warner Brothers Discovery.
The best version of any story in any genre is going to start right at the center of the action and with the people who informed and are most informed by that story. Whether it's, do you have enough archival? Do you have the right access? Right? It's about the people telling the story.
And the rise of the docuseries times perfectly with the rise of streaming. So as we've moved to more of a streaming first mindset in the types of stories we tell, it's just such a credit to how nimble and ingenious our filmmakers will be.
There's a business question there too, right, about the ubiquity of true crime, because we're in all of these different platforms and experiences at the same time. It's how the product is built, but I think it helps to define a template where all kinds of stories can be told with journalism, victim-centered reporting at the heart of it, but still just trying to find the right way to tell these stories in the right mediums. So if we have more opportunity to broadcast those stories in different formats and different templates, the better.
And so then we have to say, who do we want to tell this story with? What are the elements?
And then, of course, it's important to bring in experts and journalists and other people who can add insight and context to the larger story that's being told.
That was Ellie Hakami, principal of Talos Films.
Underpinning a successful investigation is a daunting task of managing an incredible amount of information and figuring out how to make sense of it all in a meaningful and responsible way. For more on this, here's John Allen, a.k.a. Mr. Ballin, and Nancy Grace, legal commentator and host, Crime Stories with Nancy Grace.
There is an enormous amount of rigor and care that goes into curating and putting together our stories.
That's just like when I start the prosecution of a felony. I don't have a witness list yet. AP doesn't say, hey, here's your witness list for your trial. I have to work for it. I have to read every document. I have to speak to everybody I know about the case. I have to go visit the crime scene. And guess what? I find witnesses. I find defendants.
I would say that it's often really difficult to get in touch with people that are in these stories, so we oftentimes are relying on public sourced information. But sometimes, we'll go to a courthouse and literally get documents from the source to try to put the story together ourselves.
If you've got your heart in it, it's not exhausting, it's not boring, it's not tiresome. You look forward to every document.
I would spend 26 consecutive hours researching, putting together a story that fit that template I'm talking about, writing it, and then I would record it on my iPhone. Sometimes it wouldn't record. I can tell you that is the worst. 4 hours down the tube. And we have checks and balances in place, with fact checking, again, keeping in mind that sometimes it does come down to perspective, that we have no way of knowing it's true, but we at least try to get their rendition of the story as accurate as we can.
Natalie Morales, correspondent, 48 Hours.
We boil an episode down to 43 minutes of television when we have spent hours and hours. I sit in a chair doing interviews sometimes for 2-3 hours at a time. And you're like, there's so much more I wish we could have included.
Kate Navin, head of North American Creative Development at Audible.
And you have to be game for the journey. You have to decide that there are going to be surprises that come up. There's going to be good surprises, bad surprises. You're going to have to deal with, we're going to push back release dates because there's new reporting. We have an opportunity at the trial, whatever it is. You have to be flexible. But that is the joy of it for me. I love those surprises. And I think that it's worth it.
From obscure cases to major celebrity coverage, navigating the scope of projects takes strategy and planning. Here's Beth Karras, host and legal analyst of The Curious Case Of.
It's a little bit of a challenge to find the stories we want to tell for Curious Case Of. It's not, we're not looking for murder cases. We're looking for stories that sometimes you just don't know what the truth is. You don't know what happened. They're kind of crime adjacent. Somebody isn't always arrested. Something's wrong here. It's a fraud or some kind of scam maybe. There are cases that are a little bit off the radar also. And we really, we dig into the stories. There is a team of us who have professional investigative experience. 2 former prosecutors, I'm one of them, a former FBI agent, and we dig and we get the documents and we ask questions and we find the twists and turns and we get access and we get people's trust and we just keep digging and digging. So we really investigate.
John Allen, aka Mr. Ballin.
I will be clear that we definitely are not trying to hold the Mr. Ballin YouTube channel or the podcast or anything to literally a journalistic standard, because it really would actually severely dampen and limit what we could actually tell stories about. Because one of the beauties of the strange, dark, and mysterious genre is that there are people that have just unbelievable first-hand accounts of things that they think happened to them. They are not necessarily lying about their experience, but there's no way to know if the woman who thinks a banshee attacked her in the middle of the woods in Appalachia, if that really happened or not. According to journalistic standards, we probably would say this is not true or there's no way to prove it, so we can't write a meaningful article about this. But from our perspective, as long as you understand that I'm not trying to convince you it happened, I'm telling you that this is what she said happened. That is truthful in a sense, but it's not a trick.
Brian Junum, director of Phoenix Jones, The Rise and Fall of a Real-Life Superhero.
My work usually is in the fringes of society and finding subcultures that in unique ways are on their face outrageous, and I just try to find the reasons why people are drawn to them.
Eric Sandler, chief strategy officer at Pushkin Industries.
I think for us, sometimes we come across stories that didn't come to a satisfying end or conclusion. And so what we're looking at are stories that, you know, you might call like a cold case or something like that.
Beth Karras.
Well, the cases that are well known are challenging because they've been told so many times. You've got to have something new, right? And yeah, I've covered stories for more than 30 years and a lot of big trials. But sometimes there are, you know, twists that we can tell that haven't been discovered. But I like the cases that aren't as well known because it's a new audience, you know? How many times can you tell the same story over and over? But I never get tired of hearing those same stories over and over.
Ellie Hakami, principal of Talos Films.
They're all challenging in their own ways. I think with the celebrity stories, what's challenging about that is just how much attention the story brings to itself, right? So you're starting at a place where there is a lot of media attention from the jump. And so I think that the challenge there is what are we bringing to this story that the media hasn't covered? And I think that that's a particular challenge when we tackle stories that have celebrity at the center of it. I mean, sometimes I think our job is let's tell it as a collective whole. And how is that story different as a collective whole than it is when you receive fragments of it so quickly, when you sit down for 3 hours and observe the story?
Donald Albright, CEO, Tenderfoot TV.
It's really this mix and match of who is the best storyteller for the lens that you're trying to tell that story through. You could tell that story 10 times, 10 different ways and all be great. The bar is, would we want to listen to it? And I think if you're going to be in a creative space, you have to believe that you have good taste, right? So you got to make what you would want to listen to, and you hope that that's what your audience also wants to listen to.
Eva Pilgrim, anchor of Inside Edition.
I think it pushes the creative, like, you have to do something more than just the basic thing, right? Which is give the who, what, where, when, why, because that's so easy to sort of find. And you see these content creators out there, and some of them are bonkers, right? And they really sometimes make things really difficult. But there are some that are doing these incredible storytelling moments that we can learn from, right? And we can take parts of that and apply it to our own storytelling. And I think it in general just makes all the consumption better for all of us. And so I see it as inspirational in a lot of ways.
Jason Sarlanis, Warner Brothers Discovery, Jane Lipsitz, Alfred Street Industries, and Jody Tovey.
I think at the end of the day, we're looking for stories that surprise us.
We actually, I think, temporarily lost our minds once and tried to take out a cooking show that was based on recipes of people who had actually been poisoned. So we were trying to tell the story, and that did not go well. So,
but I do think that when you expand the lens beyond the whodunits and victim versus murderer, and look at other people who are affected around it, I think that really expands the lens of the storytelling. As terms of our podcast, we're terrible. We tell you who did it in the second episode, so why would you listen, right? But I mean, you're looking at a lens from the guy who was living next door when something terrible happened and had a relationship with the perpetrator. But was he the victim? No. Would he have just gone and disappeared into the ether? Probably. But when you expand the lens from what you're examining, I think that also helps.
Kate Navin, Audible.
For us, we talk a lot also about why we're telling the story, and I think going into it with the answer to that, and your goals can be and I know that's true in theory for everything, but here I think it's very important. Are you trying to solve the case? Are you trying to introduce the crime to the world? Are you trying to humanize the issue? And I think that helps you answer, do I have the right ingredients to do this story well? And I think when we talk about true crime, we really sort of narrow on that reason why. If we're going to make people listen to this thing that is traumatic or rough or whatever, do we have a good reason to do so?
David Carabinas, Texas Crew Productions.
And I think we always ask the question, why now? So if we're going to go to a case, like, what is it about our version of this story is going to be different? Maybe it's footage and archival that no one's seen, audio recordings that no one's heard, a voice that, hasn't spoken before. It becomes not only is it a great story, but do we have the elements to really tell it?
How does a true crime story get found, shaped, and claimed in the first place? Long before a series reaches an audience, there is a scramble behind the scenes for access, sourcing exclusives, and building trust. What does the reporting process really look like? And how much of the final story is determined by who gets there first?
Here's Jason Sarlanis, the president of linear and streaming at Warner Brothers Discovery.
When you're sitting in my seat and news breaks, 80 different producers and filmmakers come to you with the same story. They're out there fighting 17 other production companies, other filmmakers to get people to say yes, to be willing to contribute to the story.
Mary Robertson, founder and president of Maxine Productions.
I was speaking recently with someone who is very close to a crime, and she told me that she has been approached by 30 production companies, 30, and that people have showed up at her work.
Eva Pilgrim, anchor of Inside Edition.
So we had specific rules about what we could or couldn't do to secure an interview. And sort of the way that we always did it was, if I found out about a story, I was like, I have to go right now. And especially in modern times, you have to be the first person on the ground, because a lot of these doc teams will find out about these stories. And next thing you know, these exclusives are snapped up under contracts and you don't get it. So we would get there, and I had a list. I'd keep this Google Doc that I would share with my producers, and we would, who are all the players? We wouldn't even fully know the story yet, right? We just knew it was something we were going to cover. We would go to every single person and sit down and have conversations. Not because we thought they would always sit down and agree with us for an interview, but because we needed to lay the groundwork to build the trust. And hopefully that would get us the interview. And sometimes it would surprise you. Like, we'd show up and we'd think we were just going to have coffee with somebody, and they'd be like, we can do the interview this afternoon. And you're like, whoa. And then you're panicking because you've got 6 hours to prepare for an interview that might be the only time you get this person one-on-one. You find out 4 years later they were an accomplice in a murder, right? And so you've got to press them and ask them a bazillion questions of what ifs. Are they shady? You can't even get a vibe off of them because you've spent 15 minutes with them at that point, right? So that was always our strategy, was just get there first, figure out what you can figure out, and collect everything you can get as you can get it.
Eric Sandler, Pushkin Industries.
I think access is really key. I mean, across the board, we've waited for years to get access on some stories, right? Even waiting 2-3 years to get the right person to speak if they're not ready, because I feel like it makes all the difference.
David Carabianis.
We may not have all of the answers. We may not know exactly how this whole story is going to go or where it's going to lead. And, once you talk to one person, another person may come out of the woods.
Eva Pilgrim.
The person who reaches out to you or how you found it could be absolutely crazy.
Natalie Morales.
You get prison mail and stuff. People follow you. I'm sure you've all dealt with your share of that.
Elizabeth Chambers, host and executive producer of Toxic.
I receive probably 100 DMs a day from women who are in shelter. I mean, very educated women who did the American dream, got married and had kids, and all of a sudden found themselves the victim of financial abuse, domestic violence, and unfortunately, the romantic aspect of our true crime is all around us. And it makes it heartbreaking, but also very simple to find these cases.
Donald Albright, CEO of Tenderfoot TV.
In the very beginning, my business partner, Payne, he found a case in South Georgia, and it was really about finding an open case that was close enough for him to drive to. And that was the bar.
Kevin Fitzpatrick, executive producer.
We sort of said to the producers who are out casting, stop finding me what you think are good stories and start finding me people who can tell good stories. People who have an honest story to tell. They're authentic. They don't have to have done it before. It doesn't necessarily have to be a famous story. I'm interested in hearing people who can tell the story.
At the heart of the genre is the hurdle of capturing a compelling interview, a delicate art where building trust with the victims, survivors, and participants is critical to success. For more on this, here's Mary Robertson, founder and president, Maxine Productions, and executive producer of Quiet on Set and The Fall of Diddy.
We started at the outside. So you build your spreadsheets, you build your list of contacts, you build your timelines, and you work from the outside in. And at every interval, you are working to create and foster trust. And I think I've been thinking a lot about trust these days. I spend so much of my days engaged in this exercise of fostering and building trust with the people who we are asking to entrust their most wrenching, most important, most significant stories.
Elizabeth Chambers, host and executive producer of Toxic.
The victim really has to be ready to talk. Not all of our victims are ready to take that step.
Sydney Fussell and Jennifer Holness, co-directors of #WhileBlack.
I think that natural conflict between trying to live your life, being aware of these things, but not necessarily wanting to be the focal point of the world's discussion on this topic, and then sort of like falling into that.
Look, you got to find ways in with folks. And, when people are terrified or media savvy, or have seen so much, there's a lot of barriers to get through. And I always say, just be your authentic self, because what you're asking for them is to give their authentic self.
Natalie Morales, correspondent, 48 Hours.
You walk in that room and you just want them to feel like they can speak to you. And it really is just letting go of any preconceived notions. You almost basically have to dumb down the conversation. Like, you haven't heard anything about this crime. You haven't heard anything about this case.
Sydney Fussell, co-director of #WhileBlack.
I knew if I came in trying to be very slick and charismatic and this will make your career, they would instantly know not to do it. But just having real conversations with them.
Natalie Morales.
It really is just listening and engaging in a way that you're trying not to necessarily throw everything out that you know, but just taking it all in, whether it's a convicted killer, accused killer, a victim, a survivor. Let's start from the very beginning. What happened here? You assume nothing.
Mary Robertson.
So it's our job to, I think, move through those moments really sensitively and not apply too much pressure when that's the right tactic, as it almost always is. It's, I'm here for you when you're ready. Here are the ways in which our values are aligned. Here is the impact that I think we could have together. And I can't guarantee it, but I can tell you what we did with Quiet on Set. And I can tell you what we did with Fall of Diddy. And I believe in what we can do together.
Christina Douglas, CEO and founder of Momentum Content, the makers of Lost Women of Alaska.
For me and my team, it was really about doing our research before even calling them, really understanding where they're coming from as much as we can. But then when we actually get there, I think it's a matter of bringing with you an immense respect for the nuance, the history, the context of these survivors and of these victims and of this community that I think you just cannot know unless you've lived it.
Jason Sarlanis.
The subjects that trusted you in that process trusted you for years because you believed in this story so much in your core.
Christina Douglas.
When you're working with any survivor community or any underrepresented community, it's not easy to automatically gain that trust. Of course, they're going to have their hesitations about it. Like, just logistically, let's talk about terminology, right? Like, there are things that we use colloquially that are actually considered ignorant or microaggressions to Indigenous communities. So if they go in uninformed and say the wrong thing, we're losing that interview, right? We're losing that story.
Sydney Fussell.
I think it's just about space and giving them the space to be themselves, and also allowing the relationship to be, I'll say, non-linear. Sometimes it's warm and cozy and we're texting every day. Sometimes it's cold and silent. Sometimes it's like, let's talk tonight, and they push it back a couple days. So I would say obviously we have deadlines. So the panic is rising with us, but not showing that and not letting the relationship, not having that reflect in the relationship. So it may be just we send a text, hey, if we can talk this week, that'd be great. And beneath that are 30,000 emails of can we confirm what's going on? So just making sure that they have that space, that we trust them enough that if they want to take that space and that time and be away and be quiet, we're not going to harass them and follow them up. But we're going to freak out privately. We're going to be on Zoom oh my gosh, what's going on? But allowing that. And every single time we gave them that trust, they came back to us and we were able to maintain it. And I think we're in a good place.
Mary Robertson, executive producer of Quiet on Set and The Fall of Diddy.
And now when I'm in conversations about building trust with contributors, they look at these previous works. So they look at Quiet on Set and they look at The Fall of Diddy and they say, I see that your treatment of your contributors was sensitive, and I see the cultural impact that those works had, and so I'm ready to come to you. So we start with the people who are at the center of it. We work to build trust. We listen to what they have to say it, and then we think about what is the honest essence of the story that we need to tell.
Kevin Fitzpatrick, executive producer of Evil Lives Here.
So I think we started just looking at how do we get honest stories told with people who want to tell them, and we started establishing relationships with people. And some of those ended up being serial killer shows. Some of those ended up being just a husband gone crazy. Some of them ended up being someone killing their whole family. But the common thread to the series is just that it's a POV interview and someone has an honest story to tell. And it's that simple. I mean, it's incredibly difficult, but it's that simple.
On the foundation of trust, the delicate mechanics of storytelling come into play. For many years, the genre has been criticized for turning pain into product. How do creators go about reconciling the tension between truth and entertainment? Here's Ryder Strong, actor, filmmaker, and the podcaster behind The Red Weather.
I guess I always knew that there was something manipulative or structured about true crime, obviously. Like, we can all know that. But when we're listening to these podcasts, we forget that, right? Like, that's kind of the fun, is that you just go along for the ride. Because it's all storytelling, right? Like, whether it's a real true crime thing or a completely fictionalized story, you're still operating on the same principles of suspense and reveal and withholding information when you want to withhold it. And I guess being super aware of what information I'm revealing and, for instance, it's 3 episodes of my podcast before I actually discover anything new about the case that hasn't been discovered before. And that's what happens with a lot of true crime, is you're just filling information, but you keep leaving the breadcrumbs so the audience keeps listening. It's very manipulative, And I think I'm hyper aware of that now. I still can enjoy it, but I'm very aware of when true crime is intentionally withholding stuff just for the sake of more episodes, more time to keep you listening. And now I can see that structure perfectly. And I think it's helpful. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think that that's actually a valuable skill. But I'm very aware of when I'm being manipulated, when you're watching a true crime thing or a documentary and you're like, well, they could have just said that up front. Right. But it's the difference between information, which is boring, right? Information is often pretty boring, and framing that information or delivering that information in a way that's exciting and keeps you engaged. And so it's that entertainment versus information question. And I just find that's endlessly fascinating.
John Allen, host and creator of Mr. Ballen's strange, dark, and mysterious stories.
The gist is there's lots and lots of people that make content that is in the sort of true crime / darker side of the internet or generally any medium. There's loads of people that make content. There tends to be a preference towards, this is from the creator's perspective, towards sort of fixating or focusing the perspective of the story on the gratuitousness of the crime or the kind of nasty details, the gore. That might get shock value, but if you're able to deliver a story where, without making it overt, without making it obvious that you're really fixating on the human qualities of the people in the story, that when you get to, inevitably, the thing that happens to them, that ultimately made this a story you're telling in the first place, if you've done a really good job, you can actually keep the violence, if you will, the gratuitous stuff off screen in some ways. Because it's the emotional weight of, I can relate to the person that this is happening to, and it really does feel like this could happen to me. It feels serious. It doesn't feel like entertainment. It feels like emotional weight, and you walk away from that story feeling like you felt something, not were shocked by something.
Here's Christina Douglas, executive producer of Lost Women of Alaska.
We get this question a lot, I feel like, sensationalism versus, respect-driven storytelling. And I think the misnomer is that, people think that sensationalism equals entertainment, and I don't think that that's true. Maybe it used to be, but not now, certainly. And, letting the victim lead or letting the survivor lead, right? I think keeping them in the center of your mind when you're thinking about how you're going to craft this story is the way you're going to make sure that you honor them and their experience.
Natalie Morales, correspondent, 48 Hours.
These are the stories I think they deserve to be told. The victims' stories need to be told. And as journalists, we realize that we have an obligation when it comes to storytelling and reporting them factually without the glorification or entertainment that a lot of people, I think, like to associate with true crime, which is not the case. I mean, we do the job of journalists first and making sure that the victim stories are told and honored in a respectful way.
Eva Pilgrim, anchor of Inside Edition.
You have to think about how what you put out there in the world comes back to them years later. You have to be honest with them about what it is you're doing and how they may or may not feel about it. Is everyone going to love the work that you do? Not always. Are you doing it in a way that you're trying your best to be respectful? Yes. Do you always get it right? No. But, we're all human. And as long as you're having that dialogue, I think it all works itself out in the end.
Jane Lipsitz, executive producer of Homicide LA and Homicide New York.
I think it's really about feeling like the storytelling is authentic and like we're not editorializing with any kind of clever editing or anything. It's really about taking the lead from, both the detectives, the victim's family, and their friends, and really letting them lead the narrative.
Kevin Fitzpatrick, the executive producer of Evil Lives Here.
Interview subjects often draws the line of what's appropriate and what's not. We have producers say all the time, like, well, should I show them the crime scene photos? No, but you should ask them if they want to see them. And if they say no, that's the answer, and the audience understands where everything is.
Christina Douglas, CEO and founder of Momentum Content.
When you think documentary, you want to be able to show the audience as much as possible. With this, we're like, absolutely not. We're going to just maybe show only things that are pertinent to the investigation. So maybe like a screenshot of the room or maybe his voice. Those things are directly play into the investigation at hand. Because otherwise, showing any more of that would have just been sensationalist.
Beth Harris, the host and legal analyst of ID's The Curious Case of.
I try to be responsive to the audience, like what are they thinking? But in Curious Case, we also give an opportunity to the other side to speak. Sometimes we get criticized for letting the bad guy talk. But look, I used to try cases. I was a trial lawyer. Both sides are presented, and our audience is kind of like a jury, and let the audience decide. I don't know what to believe. It's like this or that,
Donald Albright, CEO of Tenderfoot TV.
If you can connect with a character that you did not expect to see or hear in a podcast that sounds like this, then I think you've accomplished the goal of providing that balance and really making something credible and not salacious.
Jason Sarlanis.
Truth is at the core of everything we do. And so if we're going to give a platform to an alleged victim, we have to as well make sure that that alleged victim knows, while we will be centering them for certain, to do this right, we've got to show all angles and give the opportunity for the other side to speak. So I think it's a complicated approach, but that's the name of the game. That's something we have an obligation to do.
Elizabeth Chambers, host and executive producer of Investigation Discovery's Toxic.
I studied journalism at University of Texas, and I've always been taught to tell a really balanced story. We need to interview the perpetrator. My producer said, that's not what kind of show we're doing. And I said, why? She pointed out, these people have been victimized by the law, by the justice system, and they've been re-victimized over and over again. We're not giving them a platform. And that was really powerful to me. So we are very victim forward, and I appreciate that, and I'm proud of that, because it takes a lot to get to where these people are.
Patricia E. Gillespie, director of #SkyKing.
I've been thinking about what's running through all of these things that we're talking about. And I think there's something that can feel so inherently dehumanizing about being observed. And being observed in relationship to a crime or a terrible event that happened to you or a pain in your life. And we're the observers. And I think I came into a family that felt very critically observed, that felt they weren't able to participate in the narrative around their loved one and this horrible thing that had happened to them, which is something I experience often telling stories in the crime adjacent space. And I think a lot of my job really was, it's such a boring answer, but it's about listening, and it's about really trying to hear, what do you want to say? What didn't you get to say? What is the truth to you today? If that changes, that's okay. I'm here with you to figure out how you feel about this. We don't have to be all in today. We can be 50% in and figure it out tomorrow. And just that patience.
Nancy Grace.
When people say the word closure, I did that unintentionally, roll my eyes, because there is no such thing as closure when you are a victim of violent crime. They know who their attackers were.
Eric Sandler, Pushkin Industries.
We have a podcast called Lost Hills. And a couple of seasons ago, they did the disappearance of Mitrice Richardson in Malibu, California. And it's a case that remained a mystery. And so going back to reopen that is painful in some ways, but for the folks involved, it's also cathartic, and they're looking for some answers. And it turned out to be impactful because the sheriff's department ended up reopening up the case after the podcast. So it shows kind of the power of going back and looking at things that haven't been solved too.
David Carabinas, Andrew Goldman, and Kate Navin.
So many of the families of victims, they really want answers, or they just want people to understand what was lost here.
And occasionally you get a story where you feel like you can affect at least one life.
And I think being able to remind people that the impact is so much more than the day that the thing happened is something they greatly value.
Elizabeth Chambers.
For us, it's really just an opportunity to tell their story from beginning to end. You know, how did they get there? What were the patterns leading up to that, both of the victim and the perpetrator? And I hope that we do our due diligence to honor that for them.
Jonathan Hirsch, VP of Global Podcasts at Sony Music Entertainment.
I think it awoke in them a sense that there was also mission here too, for the record, to tell their story and their family's story, even if it's the worst moment. I mean, who couldn't want truth more than people who have been a victim of a violent crime, right?
Kevin Fitzpatrick, executive producer.
Victims of a murderer, not necessarily the victim's family, the person who was killed, the person who has to bear the shame of that murder, the wife, the sister, the brother, the uncle. And those are the people that go on and suffer out in public, walking around with basically this scarlet letter for something they didn't do. And those people have real sort of pain and trauma from that event. And sometimes, you know, just sitting down and talking about it, the things that you hear from them are extraordinary. They just want someone to understand, I didn't do this. I'm suffering with it too.
Patricia E. Gillespie, director.
I think a lot of my job is trying to help people see themselves as the heroes or the protagonists in their own lives. And like, that's when I feel like I'm living up to my highest potential. And that was a lot of what we wanted to do here. How do you cast yourself not as a victim of the media or this horrible thing that happened to you, or how do you cast yourself as a protagonist here? How do you make meaning out of it?
Nancy Grace.
I am convinced I'm not the star. The case is the star. The victim is the star. So I'm just a conduit, and I've been blessed to be able to do that.
In a time of rapid change, the possibilities for where the next story will come from is unpredictable. But these creatives are game to figure it out.
We're looking for stories that can be exploited in multiple formats. And so what used to be magazine articles and newspaper articles for us are podcasts that then we're turning into books and exploring TV film as well. But things that can start as a nucleus of a story and then expand throughout the formats.
My inbox has been so full of people reaching out and saying, gosh, I really wish you'd dig into this case. There was an injustice there.
We've got like a corkboard in the green room with a stack of unsolved cases if you want to catch me after this.
I mean, I think there's a lot of, like, Jack the Ripper. I mean, like, you know, we were sort of looking into the history of crime, and I think there's some really fascinating stuff from, you know, crimes that have occurred that you would want to revisit through a modern lens.
We've had a lot of success blending genres together, and I know hospitals, medical mysteries, hospital shows in general, right, from ER to the Pit, to find a crime set in a hospital where you have people who are supposed to care for you. I haven't found that story that's perfect for Tenderfoot yet, but that's kind of where I'm leaning.
I actually think this is where the industry is heading, is this sort of genre blend of projects. We did Not a Very Good Murder with Ronan Farrow, which is really about his relationship with this woman. Yes, there's this attempted crime behind it, but really the relationship is at the core. And I think when we explore expanding the world of what true crime means, the types of crimes that we cover and that we talk about, I actually think it becomes more about trying to understand humans than it is about the sort of rubbernecking thing. I actually think we're evolving to a great place.
To have something healthy and thriving and competitive means that it incentivizes our producing partners, the agents, the entire industry to invest in it. So I actually think the competition is taking this medium up a whole nother level. And it means that as we're going through the contraction, we're going through the pressure, true crime is very, very much here to stay.
Thanks for listening to this special true crime episode of Variety Confidential. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And thanks again to all of the participants.
This episode of Variety Confidential is produced by the Variety Content Studio team in Los Angeles, California.
Executive produced by Dea Lawrence, Alex Hughes, and Kate Aurthur. Written by Alex Hughes and Karen Mizoguchi. Co-hosted by Kate Aurthur and Ethan Shanfeld. Edited and mixed by Chuck Hogan. True Crime Summit panels were recorded on March 13th, 2026, and moderated by Dea Lawrence, Kate Aurthur, Ethan Shanfeld, and Emily Longeretta. Variety Confidential is created by Dea Lawrence and Stephen Gatos. Variety's co-editor-in-chiefs, Cynthia Littleton and Ramin Satuda.